Hello everyone, Cultural Capitalist here. Today we will answer one question. Does technical innovation strengthen capitalism? Fair bit of warning beforehand though. If you're the kind of person who values free speech by censoring certain ideas or methodologies, or if you're the kind of guy who thinks Marxism is some kind of evil black magic conspiracy to destroy the Western world and its values, well, you're probably better off closing the video right here, because we are going to discuss Marxist economical concepts. I'll give you 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. Okay, if you're still here we can go on. When you think of capitalism and its relation to history, there's basically two stances. One that is the, orthodox and mainstream one within the capitalist ideological framework, and one that is the heretical and unorthodox one. The Marxist stance, that is to say the heretical one, asserts that capitalism is but a simple phase of history, that it's going to eventually, be obsolete and replaced by something entirely different. The more orthodox stance tells you that capitalism is a very strong system, that it's basically going to be around forever, and the most extreme version of this, you might have heard of it, it's called The End of History. It's a thesis by Francis Fukuyama, although he's no longer Fukuyamaist himself, but basically Fukuyama states that free markets and bourgeois representative democracies are the ultimate form of social organization. A version that is more commonly heard is that capitalism is something that will never be truly gone, and the reason for that is it can adapt. After all, hasn't capitalism gone through periods of extreme crisis and, it's still around us in this day and age, alive and kicking? While I see where this feeling comes from, I don't think it's the right way to think about it. And if you know a little bit about Marxist philosophy of history, it often refers to the internal contradictions of the capitalist system. The idea of contradiction comes from Hegelian dialectics, which significantly influenced Karl Marx.
No, I'll destroy it because it's inevitable that it be destroyed. It's Hegelian dialectics, not personal animosity. How do I put this basically enough? It's a philosophical theory, the kind you might encounter if you took time to read some books. The fundamental premise is to envision history as a sequence of dialectical conflicts. Each dialectic begins with a proposition, a thesis, which inherently contains or creates its opposite, an antithesis. Thesis and antithesis. The conflict is inevitable, but the resolution of the conflict yields something new, a synthesis, eliminating the flaws in each, leaving behind common elements and ideas.
In less abstract terms, a thesis that is asserted will irresistibly over time bring its own antithesis that was already contained inside beforehand. In the case of capitalism, the more we assert it, the more its inner flows cause all sorts of problems, just like a machine that is poorly built and has loose screws. As long as the machine doesn't run too fast, nothing bad really happens, but when it gets past a certain speed, all sorts of problems and malfunctions arise, and can even lead to the machine dismantling itself. Now, capitalism isn't some sort of machine, but this is to get across the point that acceleration and speed radicalize the system around its own internal contradictory statements. Now, capitalism has more than one internal contradiction. We can even argue the ecological problem we're all facing now is yet another one of these, but the one we are going to discuss now is of an economical nature. Marxists call it the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. In his 1857 text called The Contribution to a Critique of Political Economy, more familiarly known to Marxists as Grundrisse, Marx formulates the TRPF and calls it the most important law of political economy. However, it is rarely discussed in the outside world, especially in today's mainstream economics, that is to say the neoclassical theory. The tendency of the rate of profit to fall explains long-term consequences of technological innovation and capitalism. We spontaneously tend to imagine that improved production techniques, automation, the streamlining of logistic lines, etc., strengthen the economy. And in a way, that is certainly true. But when production techniques are improved, well, productivity and production both increase, leading to all sorts of social and economical consequences. Goods become more accessible, less people are needed to work in factories and assembly lines, the average purchasing power increases, etc., etc. What we do not really realize, though, is that the long-term process of innovation undermines the very foundations of capitalism. And to explain this, we will consider a generic goods producing company, let's say a bakery, although it does work with basically any sector of the industry, be it goods or services. Alright, let's consider your typical 19th century bakery. No machines, everything is handmade, there's no streamlined production process, no automation of any sort. Let's say you have 3 bakers and together they're able to make 200 loaves of bread per day. You would sell these for, let's say, $1 each. So let's say you need about like 30 cents for the ingredients of the bread. The flour, the yeast, you need to pay for the coal to burn in the oven, etc. So let's say you need to pay each baker $10 each for their day of work. And for calculation's sake, we will assume you pay no rent for the bakery itself because you own the place. Your total profit then is fairly simple to figure out. Assuming you sell everything, that's 200 loaves sold for $1 each, you get 200 bucks. 30 cents times 200 does $60 of flour, yeast, etc. So you're left with $140. Wages being $30, then you have 110 bucks per day. Meaning the total profit per unit sold is 110 divided by 200, which is 55 cents per loaf. Now, keep this figure in mind, because we are going now to consider a very modern and sophisticated 21st century industrial bakery. Something extremely automated and streamlined with all the scale economies you can imagine. The kind of bakery that's able to output 1 million loaves of bread per day. Assuming you sell all of them, you'd think you'd make $1 million per day. And well, that's not true, because in spite of baking a lot of bread, the other factories also do. Technical innovation spreads around and eventually everyone has a very similar production process. At the very least you have competitors. And because of competition, while barring convenient arrangements between industrial leaders, which is something that happens but still illegal because of antitrust legislation, the price of the loaf goes down. Because you can't really sell your loaf for $1 if the other guy across the street sells it for 50 cents. In this case, you would have a really hard time on the market. So you sell your bread for 55 or 50 cents per loaf. Well, it's fine because you actually sell a lot more of them, even if they're cheaper. But your company is not really viable because of high margin per unit sold anymore, rather than it is through sheer volume of goods being sold. What does this change? Well, basically all the prices are spiraling down because of competition. The profit per unit sold goes down as well, and it makes it harder and harder for you to make profits. Eventually you would only have, I don't know, a handful of employees in your factory, just supervising machines, making sure nothing breaks or messes up, and these wages will really be the determining factor for the profit per unit sold. You can't really cut the prices on flour, yeast, etc. past a certain point. If you buy them in bulk, you're probably getting a price as low as it gets, and for maintenance and other typical expenses, they can't really be lowered too much either. So salaries become the variable here for units sold, for the profit, I mean. Now, the example I've made works for basically any goods or service industry. As the sector grows and becomes more and more sophisticated, the goods or services it offers get cheaper, and while in the short term this causes an increase in total profit, eventually the profit per unit sold goes down, well, because of competition, and today nobody really cares in finance about heavy industry like oil refining, metallic ore processing or fabric weaving. Think of the price of a piece of clothing that was handmade compared to clothing that was made with an industrial machine. Or think of the pre-printing press era, when a single copy of a book was extremely valuable because of all the time invested in it. Once the printing press has been developed, books became a lot more affordable and widespread. Now, let's go back to our bakery, shall we? When you used to have one baker to feed, 100 people, now a single company can supply dozens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of people by itself. Since competition is harsh and single actors can now provide for millions of people, well, the big fish eats the little and we end up with consolidation. What does this mean? Well, it means basically less and less economical actors make up for a larger and larger part of the market, and they make less and less profit per unit sold. Think of a giant economy actor such as Amazon. Think of how Amazon undercuts everyone on shipping prices. How much money does Amazon make per package they send? Well, very, very little. Is there any room to further streamline the logistics? Probably not. Take a look at their gigantic warehouses. It's already very concentrated. And the company now is struggling to diversify its activity. For instance, they are trying to become leaders in web services. They're licensing a game engine now. Amazon is trying very, very hard to keep making money because they barely make anything from their main activity, which is being an online retailer. Well, this applies generally to the whole economical system. It means capitalism is always climbing a slope, and it always is making this slope steeper. As technical and industrial progress happens, which is something capitalists actively seek, they're actually sowing the branch they're sitting on. Thus, we speak of an internal contradiction. The end result is that to increase the profit per unit sold, you either need to lower the workers' wages or shift to another market entirely. Think of consumer electronics, like smartphones, for instance, or laptops, or tablets. Well, before technology allowed these to go mainstream, well, they weren't a market, obviously, and now they are. So, say you're the Apple company. You want to make more profit, so you either create a new market, well, like smartphones, or tablets, like the iPad. And, well, the original iPhone and subsequent versions were a tremendous success for Apple. Creating a new market can be either selling new goods that people didn't used to buy, or it can be selling stuff to another country like China. But this only works for so long, because once China has its own smartphone brands like Xiaomi or Huawei, and they are competing directly against Apple, well, things get tricky for Apple. And look, they're in a very tight spot financially, and Amazon as well. As you can see, there is no clear solution, and workers' wages necessarily always have to go down, and this is not out of capitalists being evil or greedy or selfish. It is an inherent flaw of the system, and it cannot be addressed without leaving the capitalist framework altogether. And eventually the workers' wages are so low they can't even consume that much anymore, and then demand grows down, and when demand goes down, well, it means growth doesn't happen, and we stagnate, and we have financial crisis, which is pretty much where we are now. I hope this video has been clear. I hope you enjoyed watching it. Maybe I'll make some in the future. Until then, see you around.